When you think of a killer, you probably picture something out of a horror movie. Tall, creepy, lurking in the shadows with an evil, eerie feeling. But what if I told you that this killer looks more like your little cousin who just graduated high school than really a cold-blooded murderer? Yeah, welcome to this story. Australian businessman Morgan Huxley was just walking home after a chilling night at his usual local bar. Not in a dark area, not in a crime-ridden neighborhood, but in Neutral Bay, one of Sydney's nicest neighborhoods. And then, out of nowhere, bam, murder. But the biggest twist, the killer wasn't just a scary stranger. He was a fresh-faced 18-year-old who looked more like he was just going to ask you for your Netflix password instead of committing a brutal crime. They called him the babyface killer. This is one of the cases that make you go, wait, what? And today we are diving deep into this shocking, terrifying murder case. The murder of Morgan Huxley. So welcome back to another Beauty and Crime Sunday with me. My name is Lucia, and in this case we're gonna talk about the case of Morgan Huxley. If you are new to beauty and crime, I kinda post solved or unsolved cases and also some strange cases that I found while I do my skincare at the same time. So if that sounds something that you might enjoy, please consider subscribing to this channel. So let's actually start with today's case. Today's case will take us to Emerald City in Sydney, Australia. You kinda already know the drill. Sydney has the harbor, the opera house, great beaches, and killer brunch spots, honestly. But also, yeah, it costs a fortune to live there. But let's switch gears now. What's really around Sydney? To the west, we have the Blue Mountains, a rugged slice of nature filled with dramatic cliffs, lush eucalyptus forests, epic waterfalls, and enough hiking trails to make your knees go weep. To the east, however, the vast Pacific Ocean. So yeah, between the mountains and the sea, Sydney is pretty much showing off. But today we're not really gonna talk about surfing or sightseeing. We're going to a little quiet corner in the city, Neutral Bay, tucked just below Sydney's North Shore. This suburb has a rich indigenous history, first inhabited by the Camaraikal people. The name Neutral Bay also came later, when it became a designated landing spot for foreign ships. But fast forward to now, and it's a more swanky, high-demand area with property prices that will make your wallet cry. And in 2013, right there in Neutral Bay, lived a man named Morgan Huxley. Morgan wasn't just another resident. He was a guy you actually noticed, bright, very charismatic, and by all counts, a human golden retriever. He did share a 2-bedroom flat on Watson Street with his housemate Redmond, a 24-year-old psych physiotherapist from Ireland. Morgan was actually the youngest of 3 kids, born to Alan and Lorraine Huxley. His sister Tiffany was 10 years older than him, and his brother Oliver was 7 years older, so he was the youngest. Though his parents split when he was very young, the family actually remained very tight-knit. Despite coming from a very creative family, his mom, sister, and brother were all artists or graphic designers. Morgan went full left field and pursued engineering. He studied at TAFE, Australia's technical education system, and later became a very qualified engineer. He stood over 6 feet tall, weighed around 90 kilos, and had an easygoing presence that made people trust on him and also feel safe around him. He loved football, adored animals, animals. He even adopted a lion and an elephant in Cape Town, South Africa. It was basically the life of the party. Morgan had actually everything going for him. Good looks, a strong career, solid friendships, and a killer sense of humor. But none of that would actually protect him from what was coming next. By 2013, Morgan Huxley was 31 years old and crushing it, obviously. Thanks to his degree in ocean engineering, yes, that's a real thing, he had launched his own company called Huxley Marine, not very original, but okay. He wasn't just any guy that was in his high best. Morgan was building pontoons, jetties, and seawalls. Real, actual, tangible stuff. And business was booming. He would just landed a major contract on the Central Coast, and it finally felt like all the hard work had paid off for him. This wasn't just a 9-to-5 for Morgan. It was his passion, the thing that actually made him get out of the bed every morning, with or without the hangover. And speaking of celebrations, Morgan's best mate, Chris Maroney, was about to get married, and naturally there was an engagement party. On September 7th, the crew got together for a classic Aussie barbecue. Beers were flowing, laughs were very loud, and at some point in the night, Morgan lost his shoes. Yeah, that kind of party. As the clock crept past midnight, people started peeling off. Morgan and a few friends caught a taxi back to Neutral Bay, but Morgan, he wasn't really done yet. He wanted one more beer, and he knew just the place, his favorite local, the Oaks Hotel. Problem was, no one else was skied, so Morgan left by himself and just went to his local place. Surveillance footage shows him shopping by an ATM around 1 a.m. and then heading into the Oaks Hotel. He grabbed a drink, took a seat near the front, watching the TV and scrolling on his phone. Still shoeless, by the way. But Morgan didn't really mind being alone. The pub was literally 200 meters away from his house, so it was very familiar for him, very comfortable. Now let's fast forward 30 minutes. It's around 1:25 a.m. Cameras catch Morgan leaving the place and turning into Military Road. Then again, more footage shows him walking up Watson Street, reaching his apartment and finally closing the door behind him. So he was home. His housemate, a night owl with frequent sleep struggles, was already in bed with earbuds in so nobody would bother him or could hear anything. But 15 minutes later, she heard a knock on the door, thinking it was just Morgan's food delivery, or maybe just a drunk mate. She ignored it and rolled over. But then around 2:30 a.m., something changed. She woke up again, but this time to a very strange sound. Not snoring, not footsteps. It was a very weird sound that it just sounded wrong. Like someone was trying to breathe, screeching, almost like an animal sound. So the housemaid froze, and she got up very slowly from her bed, heart pounding, and opened the front door to her room. She turned on the hallway light, and what she would see would haunt her for the rest of her life. When Tane opened the hallway light, she found Morgan slumped in his own bedroom doorway, covered in blood, barely clinging to life. So panicked and desperate, she called an ambulance. But despite the efforts of paramedics, by 3:30 a.m., Morgan Huxley was pronounced dead. The news obviously sent shockwaves through Sydney. His apartment was immediately sealed off, police swarming in the areas as neighbors woke to the sirens and flashing lights. A profound sadness settled over the community. Morgan was very well loved, and nobody could understand who would want to actually hurt him. The medical report was brutal also. Morgan had been stabbed 28 times in his back, neck, shoulders, and his head. And the worst part, the knife used to kill him was actually lodged in his skull. Tame, the housemaid, was obviously left traumatized, struggling to come to terms with what she had seen. Meanwhile, Morgan's friends were devastated. Hours earlier, they had been laughing at a barbecue party. Now they were haunted by his lifeless body. But the investigation had to start, and very fast. Morgan had no known enemies. Sure, there was some business disputes here and there, but nothing really violent. The biggest question on everyone's mind was this just a random attack? Could the killer strike again? Thankfully for the detectives, the zone, since it was a very good neighborhood, it was all filled with video surveillance. They tracked Morgan's every little step until his death. But what they found next was a game changer. When they were looking closer at the surveillance, they realized that, yes, Morgan was walking to his house, but then a shadow, a skinny little man, was walking behind him. Were they really connected? Was this guy involved? Or just a coincidence, but taking into account that it was 1:30 a.m. So 2 weeks into the investigation, cops were kind of lurking around to see this mystery guy, if they could find him. Surveillance showed that he was wearing a chef's uniform, so it suggested that he would work locally. And then a break came from an unlikely source. A barista at Sydney's cooking school. He recognized the guy in the media and gave them a name. Danielle Jack Council. Danielle was 20 years old and worked as a chef at a very good cooking school where the barista that called actually worked. So he described him as shy, kind of socially awkward, and nerdy. So Daniel did not really fit the profile that they were looking for. He was introverted, skinny, and openly gay, a big fan of video games, the TV show CSI, and true crime documentaries like Us. So he was born in Wellington, New Zealand, and Daniel was adopted at birth by his foster parents, Mark and Jan Council, thanks to his foster family, who own a very successful real estate agency. Daniel grew in a very privileged, happy home. He studied hospitality at Baltec and dreamed of becoming a chef. In 2010, 3 years before Morgan's murder, Daniel moved to Sydney just to pursue that goal. But by 2013, he was battling with depression and was on antipsychotic medication. Despite these actual struggles, Daniel had no criminal record. So when police questioned him about Morgan's murder, he denied about everything. But here's the chilling part. Daniel told the investigators that if he was actually the killer, they would never catch him because he was too smart and very obsessed with true crime. Investigators also learned Daniel had bumped into Morgan the night of the murder, but only very briefly at a convenience store before Morgan went to the Oaks Hotel. So why was Daniel running after Morgan later that night? Even stranger, another clip showed Daniel waiting for Morgan across the street from the pub. So that was technically enough to bring Daniel to an interview. So what happened next? Well, that's where the story really gets a little twisted. Daniel walks into the interrogation room like he's just there for a casual chat, totally relaxed and very well composed. But when the detectives actually start to ask him the tough questions, his answers, well, let's just say creative. I was just going that way. That doesn't look like me. I don't really pay attention when I'm tired.
It's cold. Mum always tells me if you're cold, go for a jog.
If you're cold, I'm just wondering why you would go that way. That doesn't look like the most direct route.
I don't know. I don't. When I get tired, I don't really pay attention to a lot of things. But I'm not very good at remembering things.
Classic dodging the question, I would say. When confronted that DNA was found at the crime scene, detectives asked if he would provide any DNA for comparison. His response, a big fat no. He said he didn't really trust the police to give DNA to them. Suspicious? Yeah, a little bit.
I explained to you that we'd recovered some DNA and fingerprints from the crime scene at his house, yes, gentlemen, and that I asked you, were you prepared to provide a sample of your DNA and your fingerprints? Yeah. And then you told us that you weren't comfortable? Yeah. Is that correct? Yes, that is.
But without enough evidence tying him directly to the crime, there was nothing else, so they just had to let him go. For now. But guess what? Just 2 days later, guess who calls the detectives? Yup, Daniel. He admits he wasn't really telling the whole truth and wants to meet again for another chat. How did his story change? He said, a car park in Neutral Bay. Just a casual meetup. Here's where Daniel's story takes a wild turn. He claims that Daniel and Morgan that night, they actually talked. Yes, talked. Apparently Morgan was upset about what a hard time he had this week with work. Daniel says they made eye contact, chatted very briefly on Military Street, and then, wait for it, they ended having sex. And as Daniel left, he said that he saw an angry woman entering Morgan's apartment. Sounds juicy, right? There is only one problem with this statement. There was zero evidence that Morgan was ever involved with other men, and no witnesses back this up. That was the final straw for the detective, so Daniel was arrested because nothing that he's saying makes any sense. Meanwhile, the detectives are looking for different clues and they see a blood stain on Daniel's backpack. So they took DNA samples of this, but I don't know if they did it in secret or Daniel knew about this. But the lab results would take a couple days. So with nothing concrete tying him up to the case, they had to let him go again. But here is where the story comes from weird to downright chilling. The stain on Daniel's backpack, well, it was blood. Not just any blood, Morgan's blood. And the fingerprint on Morgan's bedroom door, oh yeah, that was Daniel's fingerprint. Even worse, Daniel's DNA was found in Morgan's lifeless body. So how do you explain that, Daniel? So meanwhile, the police started kinda digging into Daniel's past, talking to psychologists who actually treated him. Turns out Daniel was a ticking time bomb of dark, disturbing thoughts. In May 2012, over a year before the murder, Daniel confessed to a psychiatrist named Dr. Susan that he had very intrusive fantasies about grabbing a knife from work and stabbing someone on the way home. He even admitted that he had once taken a knife, but it didn't find the right moment to use it. When asked if he would thought about the consequence, Daniel shrugged it off, like it was no big deal. But fast forward to 1 month. In another appointment, he said he would only go to jail if he wanted to get caught. But he claimed that he didn't really want to kill anyone. After that, the doctor stopped monitoring him very closely. But with DNA evidence, fingerprints, and psychological reports about his past, Daniel was finally arrested and charged with Morgan Huxley's murder. And get this, Daniel tried to claim that he had Asperger's disease and also autism to explain his behavior. And I feel like a lot of criminals have done this before. Let me tell you that you are autistic, that doesn't really explain your behavior. But obviously for a lot of people that didn't really fly with them. Experts said that his actions didn't really line up with his condition. So lie after lie, I'd say. But the truth was closing in for him. Let me tell you, Daniel says, oh, I'm not gonna be caught because I'm very smart, but what he's doing doesn't really sound very smart to me, but okay. So, the trial actually began. Daniel stuck to one key claim, that he and Morgan had consensual sex. But here's the thing. Morgan was known to be straight. No dating profiles, no witnesses, no social media hints, nothing to support Daniel's story. The courts soon learned more about Daniel's troubled past. Diagnosed with Asperger's, bipolar disorder, autism and depression. He was on a cocktail of medication, antipsychotic and antidepressants medications. So clearly Daniel had a lot to go through. But despite mounting evidence, Daniel claimed he was not guilty. So what really happened that night? Surveillance confirmed that Daniel was chasing Morgan after the pub. But did they ever talked? Most likely no. After Morgan got home, he headed straight to his bedroom and basically passed out. Probably drunk with a blood alcohol level over 0.22. So 15 minutes later, Daniel showed up and knocked but got no answer. The front door was actually unlocked, since Morgan had a habit of leaving it that way when he was drunk. So Daniel just crept inside. He very quietly went upstairs, found Morgan sleeping in his bedroom, and with the man's guard down, acted on his darkest desires. What started as a sexual assault quickly turned into a brutal stabbing spree 28 times, until Morgan lay dying in his own bed. Then Daniel stole Morgan's phone, disposed of the knife that he used and also phone, went home, slipped into his pajamas like it was a normal day, and casually played PlayStation. Meanwhile, the housemaid woke up and discovered Morgan's final movements from bed to doorway. A haunted image no one should have ever seen. But imagine walking into the next room and stumbling into your best friend's murder case. Honestly, I can't even imagine, but this case obviously shocked Australia to its core. And sadly, the media dragged Morgan's name through the mud, often blaming him for his own death. Daniel, on the other hand, he seemed to love the spotlight, earning the grim name of the babyface killer. But the trial lasted 2 weeks only, and 3 hours of jury deliberation. So Daniel was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison with a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole, which won't really be considered until 2044. The judge said it didn't really matter if Daniel killed for thrill or obsession. It was senseless and needless. Psychologists actually warned that he would probably kill again if he was given the chance. Here's a side note. Before the murder, like 6 months before the murder, Morgan told his friends about a young man suspected to be Daniel, but we don't really know, who had followed him home and even slipped into his apartment before being pushed out. But Morgan never reported it. He just shrugged it off like a weird thing that happened to him. But in the weeks after Morgan's death, 2 other men came forward, reportedly saying that they were also being followed by a man who also looked a lot like Daniel, always in the same cook's uniform. Who knows what could actually have happened if Morgan actually reported this earlier? I guess we will never know. But Daniel appealed to reduce his sentence by 10 years. But the appeal was rejected in 2017. And according to prison insiders, Daniel's making a very active social life in prison. This case is a very strange and chilling reminder that some crimes have no reasonable motive. Daniel basically destroyed the lives of Morgan's family, his foster family also, and countless friends that Morgan had. Morgan was a very positive, vibrant man, a family guy, a passionate man who had a lot of good things going for him, and all of it was stolen by one senseless man and one broken mind. Think you know how a killer looks like? Well, this case tells you, think again. That's the Morgan Huxley's case. Proof that darkness can hide behind the most innocent faces. If this case blew your mind, smash that like button and subscribe for more chilling, horrifying true crime cases like this one. Also drop your theories in the comments. What do you really think that went down that night? Because Daniel will never tell the whole story. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, do your skincare. And if you don't end up like a glazed donut at the end of it, you're not doing it right. Bye bye!